I'm very comfortable calling myself a Stephen King expert, a Tolkien expert, a George R. R. Martin expert, but with Wheel of Time, I have to confess I don't know this as well as I should, so I have to go in this with a lot of trepidation. But we're going to hear a little bit of an excerpt from Stephen King. Now, I actually know this conversation. I've heard it a couple of times, actually. It's between him and George R. R. Martin, which would seem obvious, something I would cover. But I forgot this little section where King is basically very dismissive of Wheel of Time. He doesn't elaborate as to why, but I think I'm going to fill in the gaps. And it may not please people as to why he thinks this, but let's hear him speak.
Um, and before we do anything else, I have to tell you that I had not read any of the Game of Thrones books. This goes back about, I'm going to say about 6 years. And I had kind of a thing where I said to myself, probably don't want to read these things because, I tried to read Robert Jordan and I couldn't read any of those books. And so I thought probably these are just terrible. So, I didn't have any real urge to go into them. My wife had them all, but my wife and I don't talk that much about books. We talk about everything else.
Now, in terms of the totality of the conversation, essentially, King didn't really read George Martin at first with Game of Thrones. What happened is his wife was into it, and out of curiosity, he started reading it, and he really liked it. However, as he says, he was fearful that this would be a lot like Robert Jordan, and he would not enjoy it at all. Now, he doesn't explicitly say, but if you know The Dark Tower and his own kind of epic fantasy series, he makes very clear in the preface, which I have because he actually has several different versions of the first book. I'm not going to go into that, but basically he made a lot of mistakes, and the only way he could rectify it was basically putting out a new edition of the first book. Yeah, that's a whole other kettle of fish. But in any case, in that preface, he goes into how much he really loved Lord of the Rings and wanted to imitate it very badly and do something like that on his own. However, he decided that it wouldn't feel right if he tried to do what Tolkien did with dwarves and elves. He had to do something that would fit him and the American setting and that would make sense to him as an American writer. So he crafted deliberately the Dark Tower to have, yes, a lot of similarities, but be very, very different from Lord of the Rings. And I know some people have fought me on this, but again, this all may be a stereotype on our part. Again, I've only read a little bit of Wheel of Time, so my knowledge here is very weak. But the stereotype is that Jordan is basically just doing Lord of the Rings, and he's just blindly imitating Tolkien and isn't really adding very much. And the books are just very, very long. They go on for a very long time. He died before he could even complete the whole fantasy series, so it's sort of like, okay, well, if you like Tolkien, you'll like this, but basically, well, why do you want to read these books? Why not just read them in a much more compact and better form with Lord of the Rings? Again, we don't know specifically why King doesn't like Jordan, but I think we can really put the gaps together that, yeah, okay, I understand what you're trying to do, because again, Jordan is also an American writer, and he basically went down the wrong route. Instead of trying to create your own idea of a mythology and your own voice, you're really just imitating Tolkien, and I don't think that's the way to go with this. And what he tried to do with the Dark Tower, whatever you think about it, whether you like it or not, or don't think has very high quality, it is a very distinct fantasy series where he tries to take his influences, but not just copy Tolkien. And again, George Martin is on record. He's also a big Tolkien person. And a lot of Game of Thrones is very clearly influenced by Tolkien, but it tries to go in its own direction. And again, for whatever reason, Jordan is considered kind of like the one to target because it's like, okay, you went the wrong route of just being much, much more imitative of Tolkien than you should have. But let me just say something on behalf of Jordan because it feels like I'm just attacking him to attack him. He's made very clear numerous times whenever he's asked that what he's doing is not medieval fantasy. Again, it's not historical fantasy. He's made very clear Wheel of Time is its own thing. It is not trying to be like anything else. It's not trying to be taking things from history. It's not trying to do something from medieval fantasy. Whereas, ironically, Game of Thrones, I don't think also is medieval fantasy, but there's no doubt there is a little bit of medieval fantasy in George Martin's work. There's no doubt about that. But Jordan, good or bad, did not want his books to be considered medieval fantasy and to sort of assimilate it into that genre shows you don't understand what he's up to. So to be fair to both sides, I think maybe King, again, with good reason, thought this is a little too close to Lord of the Rings. If that's true, and as he's kind of thinking this is just bad medieval fantasy, then he just didn't give Jordan a chance, because that is not what he's doing. Now, maybe it comes a little too close to that, but again, according to Jordan, that is not the intention of the books. It's trying to do something else. I'm a novice to the books, so I want to be careful in defending Jordan too strongly, but again, I don't want to hide things either, so make of that what you will. If you think Stephen King's the superior author, then this is pretty devastating. If, on the other hand, you think he's just okay and he's overrated, then he doesn't really know Wheel of Time, and he didn't give it a proper chance, so we shouldn't take him too seriously. This has been Fantasy Analyzed on Stephen King's criticism of Robert Jordan. Thanks for listening.